Hi, everybody. I'm Jennifer Tryon. This is Honey, and we are going to get ourselves set up for free motion quilting today. Ready to do some free motion quilting with rulers, Honey? Yeah. Mostly Honey's a distraction. So, okay, off you go. Come on. Bye-bye, Honey. There you go. It's fun having Honey in the studio. I know. Okay, there's some things you need to get started. So I've got out all kinds of different examples of quilting rulers, and it's actually important to keep in mind that there's a big difference between these rulers that are used for quilting and this kind of ruler here that we also use in quilting, well, piecing anyway, when we use it with a rotary cutter and mat, a cutting mat like this, a self-healing mat. Yes, this is a ruler that we use during the quilting process, but it's not appropriate for quilting with rulers. So we're not using that, but we are using rulers that come in all kinds of different shapes and a couple of different thicknesses. When you're using a home domestic machine, not a long arm machine, and they come in all kinds of different shapes, even really funny shapes that you can't imagine that you'd want this design, but then when you see it all stitched out, you're like, hey, pretty cool. So these quilting rulers all come in different kinds of shapes, but they're all 1/8 of an inch thick and perfect for a low shank sewing machine or a high shank sewing machine. Or you can get a ruler that's often used with long arming, and you can use that on your domestic machine as well, but you cannot use these 1/8 inch rulers on your long arm machine. They are only good for your home sewing machine. So for this today, I'm going to put away my super thick long arming ruler, and we're just going to concentrate on using rulers for the domestic machine. One of my favorite quilting rulers is one that has a curved edge and a straight edge. It's really great for beginners because you've got both tools in one handy spot. So when we get to our project, this is the one I'm going to be using. But, you know, if you've got any of these rulers, you could give them a try when we're practicing. Okay, a couple other things that are going to be essential for your free motion quilting with rulers is you need to have a ruler foot for your machine. And you're going to need to know whether your machine is a high shank machine or a low shank machine. And if you have any trouble figuring that out, you can always reach out to us and we can look your machine up for you. I'm sewing today on the Janome 6650, and it is a high shank machine. Usually the higher end machines are high shank machines and the more portable, smaller machines are low shank, but you've got to check just to be safe. So we're going to be installing a ruler foot onto our machine in just a few minutes. I'm going to install the straight stitch needle plate onto my machine as well. So if I pop off my regular zigzag needle plate with the larger mouth and put on the one that has just the hole. The other thing while I've got this open, I'll take my bobbin out, is I'm going to go ahead and put in my low tension bobbin casing. And that's perfect for free motion quilting. If you don't have a free motion bobbin casing or a low tension bobbin casing, you can use your regular one. You may need to adjust the tension on your machine to make sure that your stitches are nice and tight and held together. Okay. So with the free motion bobbin casing in there, I'm going to go ahead and install my ruler foot and put my bobbin back in. But a couple of other tools that are handy but not essential is a slider mat and a little measuring gauge. This little funny puzzle piece has measurements from 1/4 of an inch all the way up to 1 3/8 inches. This is really handy because when you're free motion quilting with rulers, your ruler foot measures 1/4 of an inch from the needle over to the side of the foot. And oftentimes we need to make sure that we've got that 1/4 inch measured. And so you can bring this gauge really, because it's so small, really close in. And it's a lot easier to use than a big ruler. So I highly recommend a little measuring gauge. I'm also going to recommend that you wind a bobbin with the same weight thread that you're using on the top. This way, no tension issues are going to come up with your thread, at least while you're still beginning. Now, I'm going to use a brightly colored thread on a practice quilt sandwich here so that you can more easily see my stitches. So let's get the machine threaded up and the free motion quilting with ruler foot onto our machine. So if you've got a foot like this, or a foot that comes with your machine, you can install it now. If you are installing a universal foot like this, meaning it could go on any number of high shank or low shank machines, you'll notice that it's got a little bar here on the side and it can slide up or down. When you put your presser foot down, you want to make sure that it's not touching the feed dogs or the base of your machine the way a regular foot would. Because you want your material to be able to easily slide around. So it just should be about 1 millimeter off of your fabric. You can tighten it with your finger first, but then you're definitely going to want to use the screwdriver to make sure it's nice and tight and not budging after it's going at top speed. The other thing with a universal foot you want to be sure of is that your needle is in the center of the foot. And this might mean having to move your needle over. Now, if you have your straight stitch plate on, you won't be able to move your needle over because it just goes in that one spot. If you've got your regular stitch plate on and you need to move your needle over, then you can do that. So if you're finding that your needle is not quite in the center of your foot, put your regular plate back on so that you have the ability to move your needle over so that it's in the center of your foot. The other thing we want to do is we want to lower our feed dogs. So the feed dogs are these rough teeth right here. And somewhere on your machine, there's going to be a little button that, presto, lowers them. Because just like regular free motion quilting, we are in charge of moving the fabric. Now, before we start, with a universal foot on our machine, we need to test that the needle can go all the way down without hitting. Look at this. If I can't get a full rotation on my machine, it means my foot is installed too high and I need to lower it. So the needle can go all the way down and all the way back up without hitting the foot, yet you can still move your fabric around. And then that's when you can tighten up with the screwdriver. That's perfect. So I'm going to get you to make yourself up a little quilt sandwich like this. Just use a scrap piece of fabric, some leftover batting, and make sure you've got fabric on the back and the front, like a little quilt sandwich. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a pencil, and I'm just using a square ruler here, and I'm going to draw myself a few squares that I'm going to practice free motion quilting with rulers inside of. I'm not going right to the edge because when you're free motion quilting, you need a little bit of space to go on and off of what you're doing. You also need a little bit of space to maneuver when you're holding on to your fabric. So let's go ahead and draw 4 or 5 squares, just like that, on a test piece. Broke my pencil. And this is going to give us a little mock quilt block to practice in before we start with our good project. And here's the thing. Whenever you get a new ruler, you can do this kind of thing to test out the kinds of different shapes they make. So I'm going to start just with one block here, and let's bring it up to our machine. you're going to want to make sure your fabric doesn't catch on your ruler foot. Make sure it's nice and underneath there. And this would be the time, if you have an extension table for your machine, I've got a nice big one for the 6650 here. If you have an extension table, now's the time to use it. So I'm just going to slide that into place. And now I'm going to take a ruler. I know it's hard to see on camera because they're clear. This piece of paper will help. I've got a ruler here with a curved edge and a straight edge. Or you've got a multi-tool that has a whole bunch of different shapes in it. Find one of your rulers that has a straight edge. And the first thing we're going to practice doing is stitching in the ditch. And what's going to happen here is we're going to bring our test square right to the corner, press our foot down. Remember, we can still move our fabric freely. The foot's just sort of grazing it. And I'm going to line up my foot with the corner of my test square, just like that. I'm going to go ahead and hold on to my top thread, and I'm going to needle down, so either with the button or with the hand wheel, and I'm going to bring up that bottom thread. There's that bottom thread in white. What I like about this foot is that it's got a little slit in the side, so I can pull the thread underneath it and put them out of the way. So once you've got the bottom thread brought up, you're ready to bring your ruler over to your foot. And what we're going to do is, with our left hand, butt that ruler right up against the foot. Now, I'm right-handed, so I use my left hand predominantly to hold the ruler and my stronger dominant hand to guide the fabric. So we're going to bring over that ruler. You can, before you start sewing, just kind of practice keeping that ruler butted up against the foot and using it as a guide as you push the fabric down that line. Now, to start, we want to make sure we're sewing on a fairly slow speed. Unlike regular free motion quilting where we've got really fast stitches and really slow hands, in this case, we're going slow to medium. So my speed is set at a medium pace. Both my threads are up. My feed dogs are down. I'm starting right in that corner with a few stitches, and I'm going to nice and steady guide the fabric while butting up against the ruler and stopping at the other corner. Look at this. A nice row of stitches. We pivoted, so if your machine will finish with your needle down, that would be ideal, or you're going to want to finish with your needle down, even if you have to hand wheel. And let's try going right down the next line. So I'm just leaning that ruler against the foot till I get directly to the corner with the needle down. And there's a second row of stitches. Now, if your stitches are looking a little too small or a little too big, that is going to be determined by your speed. So if they're looking too small, turn your speed down. If they're looking too long, you could turn your speed up, or you could move your hands a little faster. What we're going for is consistent stitches. So it's going to be up to you to find a speed that gives you a stitch length that you're happy with. What I want you to notice here is when I butt this ruler up against my foot, you'll notice most rulers have some of these indicator lines on them. And so if you line up one of the straight lines on the ruler up with a straight line that you've already drawn on or with the edge of your block, that's a good way to help you stay straight. The other thing you'll notice here, especially if you've got your little gauge, is that the foot is about 1/4 of an inch from the needle. The ruler, when it's butted up against, is about 1/4 of an inch from the needle. So using your little gauge at the end of your row is a great way to make sure you're on track to hit your final point, especially when there's thread waiting there for the perfect butt up. We want those threads to meet, and so we want to try to be as accurate as possible. So my ruler, just nudging it over, so we've got 1/4 inch. Start making our way. Of course, you're going to eyeball too when you get there and adjust if you have to. Make our way right to that point. So I'm going to go ahead and cut the thread here. Ooh, pretty good. So we can go ahead and trim the threads for now. Came off a little on the edge here, but that's okay. So practice doing this kind of stitch in the ditch around all 4 of your blocks that you've mapped out here and see how well you do. That's going to be your first challenge. Remember, start in the corner and just make your way around all 4 blocks. The reason, remember, we're pulling up the bottom thread is just like with regular free motion quilting. It's so we don't get that little nest on the bottom of our quilt. On a practice piece like this, it doesn't really matter that much what the back looks like, but if this was your good quilt, you'd want to make sure you didn't have any of those nests on the back. So with the threads off to the side, rulers butting up against, and just make your way around all 4 of your squares. Careful when you turn that you move your rulers around so that your dominant hand is still where you are guiding your fabric. When you finish one, move on to the next one. I'm using the stop start button. I find it helps give me consistent speed. No matter where my speed is set, I'm not at the mercy of my foot inadvertently taking a little bit of gas off the acceleration. So I find it helps, but you can use the stop start or your foot pedal, whatever you're most comfortable with. But if you're finding that your stitches are inconsistent, maybe try your stop start button if you have one, because it could be your speed, like your foot, for example, that is inconsistent. And it's already hard enough to be consistent. So the stop start button might help you. What we want to avoid is stitches that look like super slow and long like this, like really long, or really fast and we're moving really slow. Let me show you what this looks like right up close. So really long stitches. So really long stitches like this aren't great, and really short stitches are going to look squiggly like that. What we're looking for is a nice straight line where we can see each individual stitch, and you want to make sure you can also see each individual stitch on the back too, that you're not having any tension issues. If you're getting eyelashing or you're seeing too much of the top thread on the bottom, that's a tension issue. You need a low tension bobbin casing, or you need to adjust your top tension. Okay. I've got my 4 squares. I'm just going to trim those threads. If this was a real quilt and we had long dangling threads, typically what the purists would say to do is grab a hand sewing needle, thread the hand sewing needle, and then bury those threads down into your quilt sandwich so that no one ever knew they were there. And that way you have no mess on the top or the bottom. But while we're just practicing, I'm just going to trim them. What I'm going to have you do next is have a little play. So if you've got a variety of different quilting rulers, this is when you can bring them out. If you've just got one that has a couple of different edges, have a play with it. So with this one here, for example, I've got a straight edge and a curved edge. So in one of my blocks, let's try doing one of those different shapes. So the rules are the same. You're going to butt that ruler, even when it's a funny shape, right up against your foot. And you're going to move your fabric right along, trying your best not to move this ruler at all. You can see I've got a little anti-slip sticker on the back of my ruler. You can get those. They're really, really handy. We also have some pop sockets that you can put on the top of your ruler. Also helps you not to slip because you can put your hand around it. So what we're going to do here is just like we did with the straight edge, except for this time we're going to curve. And I'm going to line one of the marking lines, one of the indicator lines on the ruler up with my straight edge of my square. I can get that consistent curve along my square. I'm going to start right using the hand wheel. I'm going to just hand wheel down directly onto my straight line at the top. That way it helps me stay a little straighter. And butting up that curve right against the ruler. Stopping when I get to that bottom line. And now here's where having a ruler that has a straight edge and a curved edge comes in handy. Now I can travel over, trying to stay on that line. I didn't do a very good job there. Forgive me because I've got the cameras in the way. And then we can make our way back up. And for these first couple, don't worry about your spacing. Don't worry that it's not like the perfect block that would go on your quilt. We're just practicing. So I'm going to travel over right on top of where I've already stitched. And do another curve. So you can see all of these are different widths and shapes and actually different parts of the curve. I'm not too worried about that right yet. However, if this was our actual quilt, we'd want to pay more attention to evenly spacing our lines. And that means we need to be marking as we go. And a very good way to mark in quilting is one of these crosshair rulers. You might have one of these in your quilting collection. You don't use this with your machine. Instead, you use it for marking. So I'm going to, with my next square, so I'm just going to use these lines here to mark. Now, on your good quilt, you would use an erasable pen or chalk or something that wasn't going to leave a real mark on your quilt. But for practicing, pencil or pen is just fine. And this is the one I forgot. So I could even go above and beyond and use that in my quilting. Or you could stop right at your okay, So now we've got all of these lines. So now with our curve or our straight edge, we could be connecting these. So I could go from one line to the next line, down to the bottom line, skipping over the diagonal and going right to the side and creating a diamond shape. I could be doing the same thing instead with the curve and connecting from here to here to here to here. Suddenly we're seeing all kinds of different designs come to life. So what I challenge you to do, even if you don't have a crosshairs ruler, is to give yourself on the corners, just draw a big X if you don't have a crosshairs ruler, and see if you can have a little fun and come up with some shapes that go in between those registration lines, those marking lines, and see if you can come up with a little block that looks sort of like a spiral graph or something that you would have done as a kid. Just have a little bit of fun and a little bit of a play. That's what I'm going to do here. Starting in the corner, and just practice if you're nervous, and bringing my way all the way down and all the way back up to the next line. If it helps you to continue to spin your fabric around because this way is a little bit easier than going top to bottom, then do it. No problem. Pulling up the bottom thread. Remember, it's easier to pull your top thread when you have your presser foot up. There's no tension on the discs. Okay, presser foot back down. And I'm just going to needle down right where I want to start and then bring my ruler back over, lining up that middle line on the ruler with my marking line. And I'm just going to go ahead and follow that curve. Right to the other side. And now look. Ooh, we've got that nice curved arc. All right, so we want to do it on all four corners. Lining up that middle line. And recognizing that it's a little tougher to do the curve than it is to go straight. So just go slow. Here we go. Next one. Okay, back to the end. Now take a look at this. Look at that cool shape that's developing. I'm going to continue practicing my curves. This time, I'm going to use the registration marks on the edges. So in this case, in order for me to get the convex, I need to flip my ruler over and come at it from the other side. Stop when you get to your line. Turn it around. Look at this nice. Imagine being able to customize your blocks like this. You're going to be doing it in no time. Okay. Let's come around. The way to stay even here is to make sure you're using whatever lines the ruler is giving you. To help keep you staying straight and symmetrical. And being very careful not to slip. Okay. Let's take a look. Cute. The whole point is that you can audition some designs that you think really look cool so that when you're quilting your next project, even if it's just something small, you can customize it. Some of those blank white spaces, for example, could have new secondary designs in them if you decide to pull out your rulers. So go ahead and fill your 4 squares with a few different things from whatever rulers you've got on hand. And work my way over. Or maybe you've got a tool like this. It's a Versatool. It's got lots of different shapes on it. Go ahead and get practicing. These can do all kinds of cool designs. So I'm just lining up the registration line here, starting in the corner there. Using that big curve. You do the same on the other side. Now, with this one, I could feel myself starting to move, so I stopped sewing, got myself lined back up again before I kept going. It's okay to take a couple stitches in place while you stop and regroup. It's better than zigzagging around. This arc, we could go up again here on either side. When we do our project, we're going to do our best to not break the thread and have to keep going and pulling that bottom thread up. Instead, we're going to do a lot more traveling around. And if you've got this tool and you don't want to break your thread, you can use the straight edge to come all the way over. Just travel where you've already stitched. When you get to the end, just shift and shift your ruler down. There are all kinds of different quilting rulers. I'll just move the machine over so you guys can see. Something like this with a straight edge and a soft arc, really versatile. Something with a bit of a sharper arc is good too. These kinds of shapes are really great standard ruler shapes. Same with this one, pretty versatile. You can take a squared edge really easily here. You've got the convex and the concave, and then a straight edge. So I love these ones for really basics. But if you wanted to get into some more complicated shapes, you can do some things like this. This is going to make a heart. This one's called the spinner. This one you can spin with also. And a lot of these, you really can't tell what they do until you see the actual shapes that they make. So I've got a couple little stitch outs here that you can see. This one here, the heart, will make a long shaped heart. This one is a spinner shape. So you literally just keep moving it around and around and around. And that little leaf shape, you just keep spinning until that circle forms. That looks really nice in the center of a block. That basic curved and square ruler that I suggested at the beginning, it looks like this. You know, you can do obviously just a straight line cross hatch, but what about a curved, like an arced cross hatch? That looks kind of cool. All kinds of different clamshells can be made, whether you've got a little ruler that looks like this, perfect for doing clamshells over and over. You can also do clamshells that look more like this, the smaller ones with this kind of a shape. You know, sometimes when you see these templates, you can't imagine what they would turn out to be, but really when you add your foot into the equation, you can see how a shape that, I'm just using the paper so you guys can see, you can see how a shape that looks like this can turn into those little mini clamshells, and how that could really help you elevate the look of your quilt or your quilt block. So I hope you've been inspired to continue practicing quilting with rulers before you get to your first project, because the more muscle memory you get built up, the more confident you become in butting that ruler against that foot and using that foot as a way to measure your distances between your stitches, you're really going to have success. Remember, the next class is a very easy project. So grab a ruler that's got a straight edge and a curve, and I know you're going to be just fine. Okay, I'll see you in the class.